Okay, so welcome back to Hindustan Astrology. I'm Katya, and today we have our next episode, episode 17 of Interviews with the Gurus. And I have a wonderful healing practitioner here who is versed in many different modalities, but in particular, what interests me was her background in the microbiome and Ayurveda. So welcome, Deborahlise Mota. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I appreciate being here. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, she's from Brazil, and she actually, oh my gosh, she's so qualified in many different things. Amongst them, Chinese medicine. I see you've got a degree in that. So just tell us a little bit about, your journey from Brazil, kind of your passion, what led you here, and
Yeah, so I always joke that my love for herbal medicine and Ayurveda came from a past life bleed through, because it just kind of...
Oh, you've frozen.
It felt like, oh, bummer. Am I frozen now?
It's okay. Go ahead. Say that again. I can hear you now. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I like to joke that my love for plants, so plant medicine and Ayurveda, really is a past life bleed through. It came from my grandmother somewhere along the line, that it's in my genetics. And when I stumbled upon Ayurveda, some 20 years ago, it felt like I was home. It really felt like it all made sense at that point, because it was the mother of all medicine. And since then, I've had a clinical practice for over 20 years. I've done Chinese medicine, phytotherapy, Ayurveda, and then I really started to go into microbiome medicine, because once we discovered the microbiome, it was almost like this light went on, because it was this invisible life force that we had been talking about for all this time. Probably Ayurveda has been talking about it for 5,000 years. They just had a different name for it, right? Whether it was Agni or Prana, and in Chinese medicine it was Qi. And thousands upon thousands of protocols that we use are actually supporting the microbes. And the microbes outnumber our human cells. And so understanding how to caretake the microbes that we host is the most important thing for our longevity and health. And it also creates our personalities, right? The microbes dictate our brain health and our personalities. And so, my whole mission now is to bridge ancestral wisdom like Ayurveda with microbiome medicine, because we can now understand what the CDs and the sages have been saying for all this time.
Yes. And my husband's a physicist, so I'm a quantum physicist. So I'm constantly hearing about the electric field. It's the electric theory universe, the electric field. And so that's the electric field.
It is.
Quantum field, which is the void, right? And then there's the electric field that goes through the quantum field. That's the life force, and they're two very separate. And then the magnetic field comes off the electric field. So we cannot have a healthy aura until we have a strong electric field. And that goes all the way down to our gut.
Yes. And this is, I know we're going to talk later about the pandemic and COVID-19, but the other thing is the immune system. 90% of the immune system is in the gut. And it's really those microbes that are wanting us to survive, because we are the host, right, for them. And they have seen that people who have stronger microbiota, like in the blue zones where they have a really strong microbiome, those people are actually doing well in this pandemic. Even people who are much older, and it's because of that diversity of the microbes. So yes, it's super fascinating.
What is your, what remedy do you give people that are, deficient in their gut? What do you first do with them?
Yeah, so everything can be brought back to the health of the microbiota. So the microbiota is the community of microbes, and there's trillions, and there should be diversities like an ecosystem. The microbiome is the DNA sequencing of those microbes. What we have found is that we can test it through stool tests to see what is the diversity of the microbes. But what we're seeing is that we actually have a starving microbiome in the West, right? So they're saying that our microbes are on the endangered species list because we have starved them so much. And the key is feeding them with fiber, like resistant starches, soluble and insoluble fibers. And first and foremost, I recommend people increase their fiber intake, and super important. The other thing is, the basics is eating seasonally. What we have found is that in Ayurveda, they always talk about seasonal eating because it was just there was no other option. That's right. What we did, right? Right. And now we don't. And what we have found is when we test the microbes in stool, we have realized that they actually change according to the seasons. And so we need to feed them according to the seasons for them to thrive. So that's the other part of it.
Now, the key word that people should look for are prebiotics, right?
Mm-hmm. Prebiotic fibers. Mm-hmm.
And we are told in the West, probiotics, take your probiotics, take your probiotics. And the problem that I learned is that, you have to feed, like you were just saying, feeding that. So if you're taking too many probiotics, you're actually harming yourself. The prebiotics feed the probiotics. And so stop your probiotics, find yourself some prebiotics. I actually was recommended, I was telling you beforehand, a Chinese medicine tonic that's made from like 10 to 20 different fermented black seeds and has all this fiber in it, and it's promoted as a prebiotic. So this is what she's, if you're looking to feed this gut, the prebiotics are what you want to do, and stop taking your probiotics while you're doing this, correct?
Well, I see probiotics as like migratory birds, that they come in and they fill in all the gaps and then they go away. And they say that if you stop taking a probiotic and you aren't feeding that microbe, it will actually dissipate within 2 weeks. You'll lose it unless you're feeding it. So there's no point in taking a probiotic if you're not feeding it, right? And, the thing is, and I know we're going to talk about allergies, but there are certain microbes that are really good with histamines, and they're really, really good microbes that help with hormone balance. And there's other ones that help with mental health. And so the diverse prebiotics is super important. And these microbes are so fascinating because they actually have personalities. Like there's one that's called Akkermansia that thrives on fasting. And in Ayurveda, we've always fasted, where, according to your chart, you fast 1 day a week, right? And so it's super important that feeds that really essential microbe that helps increase butyrate, which is your anti-inflammatory short-chain fatty acid. And the other thing that Akkermansia loves is red polyphenols. Like it's so wild. Like all the colors of the rainbow, it's like it only wants red. So like raspberries and pomegranates, and so they have unique personalities, what they need. The other thing that's in Ayurveda that we use across the board is Triphala, which is a formula with 3 herbs, Bibitaki, Haritaki, and Amalaki, that is so strong in prebiotic fibers, and it's also high in vitamin C and all sorts of things, but it really does feed the microbes. And I would love to see more studies on how Triphala affects the microbiome. It'd be super fascinating.
Wow. My brain is just going in so many different directions, because when another aspect of when you're talking about the personalities and how they each behave differently, we now know that there's not only there's an emotional brain in our gut.
Mm-hmm.
And so and you can just feel when somebody's sick because their emotions are off. And then you get them turned around just a little bit and they start to come back to that center ground where they're happy. Because I really believe that happiness is our birthright. It's our natural state of being is just to be happy and in the moment. And any disease pulls us away from that center. And, it's just the toxins and the poisons, but also what we know from P&I or psychoneuroimmunology is that the peptides in our blood act like little integrins, and they have little receptors on them, just like in our brain gut and in our human brains. So it's like we have these floating, our whole body is responsive to emotion. And so when you get that turned around, you get these, happy bacteria, happy fibers, going in our gut, then our overall emotional health shifts.
Mm-hmm. And there are specific microbes that are really powerful with that, especially lactobacillus. And they have shown that eating fermented sauerkraut, kimchi, yogurt actually lifts mood. And so it's super powerful to also incorporate it. All cultures have fermented foods, right? And there's a reason for that. And so it's both probiotic, prebiotic, but it has this high lactobacillus in it, naturally occurring, which is great. And another part of that whole personality thing, and this will blow your mind, is that I don't know if you've ever heard of fecal transplants, but fecal matter transplants, FMTs, are used in medicine for very serious diseases like Clostridium difficile, so C. diff. And they will take fecal matter from a healthy person and insert it rectally into this person who's pretty much dying. And within seconds, they get better. And it's just because the microbes then flourish and completely transform the microbiota. But the only side effect is that that person who received the transplant takes on the personality of the person who donated. So that is showing how much those microbes are in charge of our personalities, our brain health, our overall health. So yeah, it's pretty.
My mind.
It's so crazy. The whole thing.
Well, I mean, I've heard about people that get an organ transplant.
Yes,
from somebody else. They take on the personality of that person they got the organ from. But I've never, you just told me a whole bunch of things I never even knew about.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And that just shows how important it is. And right now, transiting Ketu, the south node of the moon, is in Mula nakshatra. Mula is the roots. And when I think of the roots, I think of the medicine card, the badger medicine, because badger digs out the roots, and that's the healer that digs into the ground and will stay by the side of their patient until they're better and will not leave. That's the badger medicine. And so Ketu is going to be in Mula until September 19th, when it switches signs into Taurus. So we have this whole time to really dig deep to the bottom of this disease that's plagued the world right now. And I feel like we are going to get a little bit of respite on the new moon, which is April 22nd, because it's actually in the nakshatra of Ashwini in Aries. And this is the physicians of the gods, and it's the horsewoman. And then Rahu's going to be in Mrigashira, which is the star of searching, but the star that goes with it is Bellatrix, and that's the female warrior. And who's on the front lines of this pandemic? It's the women. It's not to put down the men. I'm not saying that they're not out there. They're definitely helping. But my best friend works for FEMA, and she said that the highest fatalities right now are women 40 to 49. And mostly they're African, and the majority of them are African American. And immediately I'm thinking it's the nurses, they're the ones on the front line. And so, but I also feel that this is indicative of the researchers getting to the bottom of the cure. And, it's just amazing how fast, how fast they can come up with the medicine when they have to. And I feel like this new moon is going to be that fire, that Agni that is needed. So I know everyone's, sick of being at home and everything, but I see a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes. And I think, what you're saying is so amazing, because what we're also seeing, and, I just interviewed this amazing dentist who's also a microbiome specialist, is that we're seeing that estrogen is actually protective with this virus, which is fascinating. And more fatalities are coming with men, older men, and older women who have less estrogens. And it's really fascinating to see, because it's similar to the HIV virus, that estrogen was protective, and it has to do with where it connects to the receptor. And so I'm curious about how that will play out, because I do feel like women play an amazing role in this pandemic, and how we can heal from it. You know, this is Mother Earth saying, you know, we need to heal. Like, we need to heal as a whole planet.
I know so many people want to have these crazy conspiracy theories about it being bioterror and all this kind of stuff. I mean, a lot of people have just taken a one-way trip to crazy town, So it's like, my intuition says this is Mother Earth, just doing her thing, cleansing the planet, and just asserting her strength, her power, because she is a graha. I mean, the grahas in the 9 navagraha in Vedic astrology don't necessarily include Gaia, because we're on her. It's from our perspective. But if we lived on Mars, Earth would be a graha. So this, graha is to grasp. These planets have a grasp on us. And until we surrender to that and surrender to her and realize that, she's in charge, we're going to continue to, be sick and not live healthy. So
is it true that there's a similar configuration planetary of either the American Revolution, or there was some type of either revolt or other pandemic that looked very similar?
Oh, well, 9/11. I mean, Rahu and Ketu are now where they were during 9/11. And so, we Vedic astrologers have been talking about this time for a long time, where we have Rahu and Ardra and Ketu and Mula in the exact alignment of 9/11. And we've been, screaming, the sky is falling, the sky is falling for the past year. And people are like, oh, whatever, and now it's like, oh my God, it really is happening. Another 9/11 really happened. So now maybe people will actually listen, hey, these things happen. It's an 18.5-year cycle. When Rahu's in Gemini, indicates disease. Also, HIV was discovered with this alignment, 1983. And then also 18.5 years before that, Kennedy was shot with this alignment. So, we have to realize that, it's a game changer time. And, having Jupiter and Saturn together, what is Saturn in the body? He's our bones. But Saturn's, Mula Trikona sign is actually Aquarius, which is an air sign. And Aquarius rules the feet, especially, I think Aquarius is more like the calves and the ankles, things that hold us up. And then Jupiter, he's doing this dance between Sag and Capricorn. Right now he's in Capricorn. He's going to go back into Sag next month. So, I mean, this is a game changer year. This is where we level up. And right now, Mercury's in Pisces, debilitated. That shows our mental health is suffering. But also, we're having a spiritual revolution. I mean, look around you, and people's hearts are opening. People are, behaving differently. And it's sad that it took us to this point to, have a virus to make people surrender to the fact that, we're all in this together, and, you got to put somebody else first before you. But here we are, and it's a good thing to see this. Now, Mercury is going to go Gandanta, or toward the end of a water sign at the end of this month, and go into Aries. And we'll feel like we're drowning a little bit, but quarantine should be over May 1st, hopefully. Hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, with that in mind, like I've been thinking about that, is to really support people in boosting their immune system as they move back into the world, right? And I feel where people are really struggling is if their vata, which is the air ether element, is not supported, right? And Vata, which is super fascinating, because I'm also combining genetics with Ayurveda, because we're seeing that your Prakruti and your Vikruti can be translated into genetics, our human genome,
I'm sorry,
which is super.
It was a little bit glitch. Can you say that again?
Oh yes, of course. So, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Good. And so I'm translating genetics, the human genome, into Ayurveda, because, Dr. Lad was my teacher, and he even confirmed with me that our Prakruti, which is, our doshas, really can be translated into genetics. And what we're seeing is that polymorphisms like the CUMT causes anxiety. It causes anxiety. And the one thing that helps with anxiety is magnesium. And magnesium is actually only produced by the microbes in the colon, which is where Vata sits. So it all kind of interplays with each other, where when people are having Vata issues, and that's that whole anxiety that's happening with people right now, it's really supporting colon health. And the way to do that would be, by taking care of your microbes, making sure you have regular bowel movements, but magnesium is really good. Also abhyanga, like doing self-massage with oil, eating foods that are really helpful for Vata, that are like oily, warm, like ghee, cooking with ghee, certain spices are really helpful. Just think warming and sweet, but not sweet in terms of processed sweet. And so, these things, but there's this beautiful thing about what we're seeing is how people are coping with this is when people have a more balanced Vata, they can deal with this trauma, versus people who are very, their Vata is deranged, we call it. Those are the people who ran out and got toilet paper, because that's the Vata, right? Yeah, that's the anxiety. And, that's the Vata, that's the colon. Like, why toilet paper? Yeah, totally. Like, okay. Yeah. So, okay.
That's funny. Wow. But you have actually been treating some COVID-19 patients now.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, what's the first thing you do? Like, what are, if someone feels like, they're susceptible or around people that have it, what are you doing initially to like get them back in line?
Yeah, so it's interesting. What I have seen is also that estrogen protection thing, where the families that have gotten it, it's usually the husband who gets it worse, the father or the husband, and the woman in the family seems to have more subtle symptoms. And this is just in my experience. It's not across the board. And then what we do is we monitor to see what we're seeing, which is kind of crazy. And if you want to watch a video by this MD in New York who's confirming this, is that it's actually presenting not so much as pneumonia, but more as high altitude pulmonary edema, which we call HAPE. And it's making it that these are very healthy men that I'm seeing, that, they're young, they're in their 30s, and they're having trouble breathing. And when they go, and I'm in Colorado, so when they go up to high altitude where they live, they can't breathe. They need oxygen. And it's very frightening. And so what we're learning is, one is vitamin C is really helpful. So, and it has to do with breaking down the inflammation in the lung tissue that's causing the restriction. So vitamin C IV, if you can get it, liposomal vitamin C, which is a liquid form. The other thing is things like ginkgo, which is really good for altitude and breathing, ephedra, which is for restricted shortness of breath. There's different herbal combinations that we do. Hyperbaric oxygen is incredible. They used it actually in other pandemics like the Spanish flu. And that is helping with the whole breathing part, because that's the most frightening thing, right? It's, and when I talk to my clients on the phone, I can't tell if they're having a panic attack or they can't breathe. It's like this whole thing. So a couple of them had to go to the hospital and get oxygen, and they have the CT scan to confirm on their lungs. But what I'm doing now is figuring out how to get antibody testing. And so there is a company that I go through called Vibrant America where we can test the antibodies, because really the only way for us to all go back to normal is to know who's had it, have we built immunity to it, and then we can have this herd immunity. But also it's affecting people differently, and that's what I'm observing. But I just want to know in terms of true exposure. And so antibodies to me are the best, because they're saying that even the swab tests are close to 60% false. So yeah, they're not getting accurate testing, which is one of the most frustrating. There was actually a study, just the last piece, in Iceland, where they they tested as many people as they could. And of all the people who were positive, 48% of them were asymptomatic, which means they didn't have any symptoms, right? But what they saw in that testing is that the gene of the virus mutated 40 times.
Oh my God.
So it's mutated,
an alien.
but what they're seeing with them, and maybe because metabolically that country's much healthier than us, is it's mutating to be less dramatic or less harsh. And I'm curious to see how it's going to mutate here, because we have such poor metabolic health, and will it actually mutate to be more detrimental? I don't know. So yeah, it's super fascinating.
That is very fascinating. Wow. Yeah, well, and I have a friend who thought she had it. She wasn't sure if she had the flu or this, but she had asthma, and she had her rescue inhaler. And she said if she hadn't used that rescue, and she was on Brio Ellipta, and she said if she hadn't used that rescue inhaler, she would have been in the hospital. And she was grabbing it every hour. But that was only for 2 days. And then it went out of her lungs into feeling like pneumonia, and then it felt like a sinus infection, and she got the Z-Pack. And that seemed to help. But then it went into her colon, and she said it was like the worst constipation she's ever felt. And it was like, that was the worst part, but it seemed to work its way down. People are saying, oh, it's respiratory. And now they're finding, oh, not really. It actually is going to end up in your colon. If it doesn't get you here, it's going to go down to your colon, and it's going to be like a storm. But if you get through that, then you're good to go.
Yeah, and actually in Asia, they saw some of that, but it's more in the Western world that we're seeing that whole, I mean, the lung and the colon, or the lung and the large intestine, are paired organs in Ayurveda and in Chinese medicine. But the thing is that because our diversity of our microbiome is so poor, that's where it's going to, right? And so that's where it's really affecting us. And so the other idea is definitely take the Bifido strain back to, probiotic, definitely take prebiotics. That's what I'm doing with my family, is just pushing the prebiotic fiber as much as possible. Yeah.
Now, if you're taking the prebiotic, should you wait to take the probiotic? Like stop taking probiotic, take your prebiotic for a couple weeks, and then go back? Or can you take them together?
You can take them together.
Okay.
And the key is also to make sure you're taking the right probiotics. I usually have people take ones that are high in Bifido. The Bifido strains are much better for allergies, like you were talking about. That's because they eat histamine, and also they reduce inflammation. And so if not all probiotics are made the same, and so sometimes you'll see on the shelf you'll get a probiotic and it actually has too much strep in it. I mean, you just look at the label. And the thing is, strep is a microbe. We all have a little bit of strep. But if it's introducing more strep to our bodies and our bodies can't handle it, then it will cause more difficulty. And so I look for those that have high, like Bifido infatis, Bifido, all of the Bifido strains. And so those are the ones that I highly recommend for immune support. Yeah.
So let's talk about seasonal allergies and food allergies a little bit, because right now, it's another thing people are suffering from, or the pollen. And a lot of people are paranoid. They, are getting sick with allergies. Oh, am I getting sick with the virus? But maybe you could talk a little bit, especially about food allergies, where they come from, and Ayurveda, what it's indicative of, and what you can do. I mean, I know a lot of food allergies, you're kind of stuck with them, but some of the lesser ones can drop off if you stay away from them. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it really goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is about seasonal eating. And the thing is that we now have a place where we can get food from all over the world at any time of year. We eat the same things over and over. Some people are really become oversensitive to gluten or, wheat, but it's not because, well, it's because of many things. And one is that we eat too much of it. We eat it out of season. Like if we only ate it in the fall and we did non-process where it's not refined, then our bodies can utilize it because it's actually the most important source of prebiotic for Faecalibacterium, which is a really important microbe. And so by us being so out of season, this is where food allergies are coming from, because we're eating too many of the same foods all year round, and our bodies just can't. We're starving our microbes and overfeeding other ones. And so that's really where the inflammation is coming from. Of course, in Ayurveda, there is the idea of doing a neti pot. That's the sinus irrigation that people do. That really helps because allergies are really an accumulation of kapha. And so that can happen when going into spring. And so doing a sinus irrigation is super important. I also use homeopathy for people because homeopathy, like there's a company called Progena that makes different zones. And so if it's pollen allergies, you can actually take the pollen internally homeopathically and build up a resistance to it, which is really quite powerful, especially if your microbes are healthy. In terms of foods, we don't know exactly. I believe that we can go back to eating foods that we're sensitive to once we get our microbes aligned. Once we have more diversity of our microbes. I have seen clients that can return to eating wheat, that can return to eating dairy, and return to eating eggs and things like that. And so if they eat seasonally, they eat tons of fiber, they're feeding their microbiota, because they say that we probably eat somewhere between 10 grams or maybe 15 grams of fiber a day. That is really low. And when they studied the nomadic tribe of the Hadza, which are in the Tanzanian Rift Valley, they eat something like 100 grams per day of fiber. And they have the healthiest, most diverse microbiota on the planet.
How are they getting it though? Because we keep hearing, keto diet, is grain-free. And so how are you, expected to get in all this fiber if you're not eating all these grains?
That's the problem. I have seen people's microbes completely perish from the ketogenic diet. And it's really unfortunate because I have dear friends who are, they're proponents of ketogenic diet, especially with cancer. I totally see it as a prescriptive diet for certain conditions and diseases. I totally get it. But doing it long term, like if you look at seasons and you see that in the fall, we actually ate tons. Throughout history, we ate grasses, right? We ate grasses before we ate meat. And there's actually a great book by John Douillard, who you should probably interview. He's a doctor, chiropractor who does Ayurveda, and he talks about seasonal eating. And so he has a book called Eat Wheat, and he did a lot of research because he knew he would get a backlash, and he did from everybody in the functional medicine world. But it really goes back into history and then how our bodies need grasses and these different resistant starches to feed our microbes. And in Ayurveda, they are not against wheat.
Right.
Wheat is actually a very nourishing food, but we have overprocessed it. We have filled it up with Roundup and glyphosate. We have completely changed the structure of it. And so, yes, we have all these problems with the actual wheat in this country. But so, everything has to come into play when we look at reintroducing. But really, it's about feeding the microbes, because they say, like, for example, remember I talked about Akkermansia? Akkermansia is such an amazing microbe. It actually is destroyed by too much saturated fat. It's suffocated. And so all these people who are eating tons of saturated fat, they are disrupting it if they do it for too long. But you can imagine when you're moving into a certain time, like in the spring, if you imagine eating seasonally, that's probably when you didn't have a lot of food, right? And you were doing fasting, and you were probably having more ketones in your body. And so there's a time of year to do that, right? We just have to get into rhythm. We're so out of rhythm of nature, our HPA axis rhythm, our sleep cycles, everything. It's just we're out of rhythm. So.
Wow, that's fascinating. I had a dog who was diabetic, and so I always had to check her ketones. And so when your sugar's high, you have more ketones. And so the idea of the ketogenic diet is to keep your sugar low, and which keeps your ketones low, it keeps you in a fat burning stage. But, yeah, I feel like I'm more inclined towards eating more protein. The way my allergies played out, I have so many that I was told that stay away from wheat. I'm technically not allergic to wheat, but I'm told to stay away from the gluten because it makes all the other allergies flare up, like get worse. But corn is something that I can have. I'm not allergic to it. It's actually gluten-free. So, Mexican food is right in line with the kind of food that I can eat. And I kind of feel like my body's using these allergies to say, you know what, I'm steering you towards, what you need to eat. And the way it wants to eat is more like a paleo kind of diet, which is much more seasonal. But I love beans. I love my hummus. So for me, that's where I get my a lot of my fiber from.
Perfect. Yeah, and there's a lot of, there's more conflict when we talk about diet than any other topic, of course, in the whole world of medicine. But I do feel like beans play an essential role, and I think beans are super important. And when you look at the blue zones, there are a lot of things. Blue zones are where centenarians live the longest, healthiest lives without medication. And what they found is a lot of them, they all ate some type of bean, and so they're really good in prebiotic fibers. And so, yes, I'm sure there'll be people who are like, no, that I can't do that. But I feel the key is what you just said there, is listening to your body. Your body is telling you what to do. And when you have, I think you're an empath. And most people who study this type of medicine or into this type of medicine they have that quality, and just to really tune in to their bodies is the most important thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I'm wearing blue for healthcare workers because
that's gorgeous.
That's for you too.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I just, what I keep thinking when I see these crowds of people cheering the healthcare workers, I just brings tears to my eyes, and I keep thinking, all these kids that are homeschooling are looking up saying, Mommy, I want to be a hero like them. And just think about not only the way, in 9 months, or not only are we going to have a baby boom, but also the kids that are homeschooling now are going to grow up and say, you know what, I'm so inspired that this is the path I want to take. So I think that, it's such an exciting time in health right now because, and this is what my husband talks a lot about with, the new technology of energy. It's not about discarding everything in the old. It's not about, rejecting all Western medicine. It's the same thing. It's not about rejecting all Western science. because that's why they suppress us. They suppress us because they think that we're trying to get rid of them. But if they understand that it's not about suppressing us or them, it's about integration, and
Mm-hmm.
that's how things evolve.
Mm-hmm. You got it.
And, you know, the sky's the limit, and nobody's trying to get rid of anybody. You know, we're just trying to do the right thing. Um,
Yeah, and I actually just did a live in my group about becoming a non-essential, right? It's so funny because I practice lots of different types of medicine, right? Functional medicine, microbiome medicine, Chinese medicine, and now I'm non-essential medicine, which is kind of funny. Like I've never thought of myself like that. But it's what's so amazing is we're at this beautiful place, right? You said that, the bridging, where in China they use Chinese medicine and herbs, right? And because we can't quite figure out this virus and it keeps mutating and there's all these things, we can use diagnostic tools of our ancestors, right? We can use this ancient wisdom, whether it's herbal medicine, the idea of contracting the virus and just waiting to see what happens seems crazy. And so that's where like that a journalist, Chris Cuomo, he's using Ayurveda and herbs and homeopathy. And I'm super excited that he shares this story that it actually can reduce the impact of the virus. And this is a beautiful bridge that can bring both sides together and we can work together, which is
yeah.
amazing. Yes.
And I think that's really, you know, Mother Earth is so wise. She knows what we need.
Yeah.
She knows this is the medicine, even though, you know, it's horribly sad, all of the people that are dying. You know,
Yeah.
that's something we don't have control over. And that's the hard part, you know, is learning to surrender, you know, and finding our faith. That's the thing, you know, it's about finding our faith and not having false hope, because Jupiter's in Capricorn right now, debilitated. So we have to be careful of putting false hope into things that are antiquated, you know, and finding new ideas. So I'm super excited about the allergy information because I had started taking the prebiotics and I did notice a difference. And I was set to go back to my allergy doctor to get another prick test on my back to see where they're at now. It's been like 2 years. And I was going to start the allergy shot therapy, but all of that got disrupted by the pandemic. I can't go into the office, you know, it's not considered, you know, life-threatening thing. So I have to wait to do it. But what is your feeling about the allergy shot therapy? Is that something, I mean, because the way it seems to me is that it works like homeopathy.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that because my specialty is in the microbiota, right, that is to me, that's really where we need to focus. And when you're doing a shot, you're actually diverting from the portal of entry, right? And that's the issue. And so even with vaccines, like this has always been the issue, is if it's through a droplet, if it's through pollen, you know, it comes through here, it goes through there, it's the microbes that do their work. And when you get a shot, you're bypassing it. And so it's a different concept. And I can see the validity of it and the premise of it, but, you know, there's these basic, you know, I always just go back to the basics. I'm just like, well, if it's the microbes that we're working on, how are we influencing them with a shot, you know? And so that's where I kind of, you know, question all of it.
Yeah,
But
no, I'm with you. And maybe there's a reason why I didn't start it. Maybe I needed to talk to you first. um,
yeah.
yeah, no, I feel like, you know, it's such a problem right now because, like you said, our diet is so poor. And just astrologically, you know, if you're looking for allergies, what I've discovered is, of course, you want to look at the sixth house. And it's also very interesting that if somebody has seafood allergies, 9 times out of 10, they'll have their Neptune in the sixth house. Neptune's to fish, right? But, you know, it comes down to Mars, because Mars rules the adrenals, and that is what it kicks in when we're in our fight or flight syndrome and kicks us out of autonomic nervous system into sympathetic. And that's where the cortisol is produced and, you know, all the Mars stuff. And it's not good for our immunity. And then, of course, second house. Second house is the mouth, what we're taking in, food allergies wise. And if you have Ketu or Rahu there, indicating poison, that can indicate allergies. And so, you know, just looking at these indications in a chart, you can see right away where this is coming in. And now something I've noticed too, it seems like people from northern climates are more sensitive, you know, more sensitive to sun on the outside and more sensitive on the inside to different foods. Like that lack of sunlight somehow affected their insides as well.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think, you know, bombarding a baby's immune system with a bunch of shots as soon as they're born is a real good way to kill their immunity. It doesn't matter what their DNA says, you know, right there, that's going to take it down a notch. So is there anything you want to say about, you know, the shots and how they're killing our immunity?
Well, I actually wanted to go back to what you said about the northern climates,
Yes.
because what we're seeing is this huge epidemic of vitamin D deficiency, right? And vitamin D is actually dependent on microbes, and microbes actually produce it, which is wild. And so the sun, we're plants, right? The sun will come in, it's almost like we're plants, and it will stimulate the microbes. And so that's really this connection. And I have all sorts of research studies on this, which is super fascinating. And so the vitamin D is one of the most important parts of our immune system. It's the front line of defense, right? And we need to have vitamin D. And so in northern climates, they would use things like cod liver oil, because if they can get enough sunlight, that would bring vitamin D and stimulate that production in their bodies. And
Wow.
so I feel like that is super important. In terms of immunizations, you know, this is a very tricky subject,
Yeah.
because, you know, I just want to be very careful about how I, you know,
Shots are
word
bad.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like I said before, it's bypassing the portal of entry. Like the only shot that really makes sense to me is tetanus, because that's the portal of entry, right? That's
Right.
from a puncture wound.
Right.
I feel like there's got to be a different way. And so when we see um, children that have adverse reactions, we we see a pattern with gut issues. And so it's super fascinating to see what is the diversity of the microbes. And there's, of course, there's genetic stuff. They look at MTHFR and MTRR and all of that, but I think it really comes back to the microbes, right? And
Right.
then what we're seeing too is um, mothers need to breastfeed their babies, and if they can't, you know, there's, because of all the oligosaccharides, like getting donor milk or getting support with that, because that's what feeds the bifidobacteria that's kind of laying latent inside the baby, that then is their immune system, right? It needs to be fed by these oligosaccharides and bacteria that's in breast milk. And so, yeah, it's super, I mean, it's such a beautiful, intricate picture. If you look at, you know, it's almost like a symphony of all these microbes and how it all works. And the more we peel the layers, we're like, oh, wow, Mother Earth really knew what she was doing. You know,
Yeah.
it's, it's totally incredible. And so, yeah.
Right. But it seems to be the bombardment of so many vaccines at once that's the problem. Like what we did
Yeah.
with our daughter was just delay and separate. She got
Mhm.
everything she needed, but I wasn't about to give her 10 different vaccines at once when she's a newborn. You know, that just,
Yeah.
my intuition was like, no, give
Yeah.
her one or two that's, you know, really important, and then we're just going to wait, you know. And she got everything she needed, you know. And by the time she was old enough, she didn't need all that stuff, all the extra stuff when she was an infant, you know.
Exactly.
So you really have to follow your intuition. But, you know, like I said, when my, well, during the time of polio, you know, I mean, my grandmother took my father and aunts and uncles up into, you know, her home in the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia to get them away from polio. You know, she was smart. She knew what was going on. And thank goodness for the polio vaccine. you know? I mean, so I feel like, you know, it's just, you know, it's a very touchy subject, but it's definitely, when we're talking about allergies, we need to consider that, you know, what's happening to infants, because it's really overwhelming their immunity.
Yeah. Well, and there's so many things that are, you know, just how babies are being born, you know, like that's why I worked in a birthing center for many years, is to support natural birth. I had my babies at home, but, you know, there's just knowing women have options, and that, you know, birth is a natural thing. And it's a really interesting thing now with COVID-19 is that women do not want to go to the hospital. And so now it's a return to home birth and birth centers and, you know, stepping into their power. And so it's super fascinating to see what this pandemic is doing to shift our consciousness.
Empowerment, yeah. And, you
Yeah.
know, going back to what you're saying about the sun, that's amazing that it was the vitamin C deficiency. And in astrology, you know, the sun is Surya, and that's the life force. That's the flashlight in a chart. And where he sits, he lights up that house, you know. But if he's sitting in a house that's really dark, like the 8th house or the 12th house, that's a flashlight in the dark, but that darkness can also engulf that light, and the life force can be really low. So that's another thing you're going to find with health issues in a person's chart, is if their sun is debilitated or sitting in a house, Dastana house, where it can't function properly.
Mm-hmm.
So that, it's like that ties into what you're saying. It's just, it blows my mind. Now, okay, just to go over, because we've been talking about Ayurveda, but we didn't properly talk about the doshas. So just so for newbies that don't really know a whole lot, there are 3 doshas. Vata is air, Pitta is fire, and Kapha is earth and water.
Yes.
So maybe you could just briefly, you know, just tell your take on the doshas and, you know, what you think.
So we're actually a combination of all 3 at any given time. And when we do pulse diagnosis, we push down deep to find the prakruti. And so that is a ratio. And so pitta is actually fire water. And you're like, well, how can fire and water mix? But if you think of stomach acid, that's fire water. And that's the seat of pitta. And then vata is ether air, and that's the colon. And then kapha is the lungs, or the upper, you know, part of the body, and that is the earth and water. And so we are a combination, and some disorders are associated when those become out of balance. Now, to say, like, for example, I am, you know, pitta 2, vata 2, kapha 1, right? And if my vata gets too high in my vikruti, I bring it down, but it's not that I don't want to dissolve my vata, because I need that. That's part of my structure, right? And what's so beautiful about Ayurveda is that they have been doing all this time, is this kind of individualized medicine, right? This almost genetic medicine, like looking at your constitution, and then from knowing that different blend of these doshas and the gunas that you have, you can then have a lifestyle and a diet and how to keep it in balance. And that is what's so beautiful. It's lifestyle medicine. And when, you know, you've been talking about jyotish, and jyotish is one of the pillars, right? So we have jyotish, Ayurveda, and yoga. And when you look at those 3, the Ayurveda is for the body, the yoga is for the spirit, and the jyotish is for the mind. And it's because it calms the mind. When you have a really good jyotisha like you, helps kind of guide you in calming your fears.
The eyes of the Veda. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And so, you know, really where Ayurveda fits in is this one of the 3 pillars, right? And it's a very valuable pillar, and they all work together. And so a true Ayurveda, like my teacher, Dr. Laud, would also look at a jyotisha, like look at a chart, look at their Vedic chart, as well as, you know, have yoga practice, you know, because that's for the spirit and for enlightenment. You know, and I always joke about how did these sages figure out the microbiome, right, and genetics. And Dr. Lod would always tell me about how they would meditate and go inside the body with transcendental meditation and see all the things that were going on. And then I just called them the original health hackers. So they had the original health hacker medicine, which is Om, right? They went inside the body and saw all the microbes and all the genetics and figured this out. They just figured out this medicine 5,000 years ago. It's so incredible.
Some say it was actually 50,000 years old.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, that's just all we have in terms of structure.
And
it was all oral. It was oral. Yeah, exactly.
Think about what these rishis, how they, transcribed all of this sacred information. I mean, and how it's just right on the money today. I mean, it's still valid to us, and I'm so grateful. I mean, I was a belly dancer for 26 years, and I studied Arab music, got my master's in that. But I knew there was something, I mean, I was just always drawn to the sacred part of it, the underlying science, like what is it about this music that is making me become emotionally healthy, And every time I was always brought back to the Vedas,
Yes.
Like all of the information I was looking for, even in Arab culture, it was coming back to that body of knowledge. And so I thought, well, this is where I better stay. I keep coming back here.
Yeah. And that's something that's a really good point, is music and sound. And, in Ayurveda, they said it all began with sound, right?
Yes.
And so really doing mantra is also a really good way to help calm the vata and calm the mind. And probably doing mantra for Ganesha, Ganapati would be really helpful, because, that's the seat, that's Jupiter, that's the root chakra. And so I think, remembering mantra and sound would be great. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, I love Ganesha, and, you always start your mantras with him. And a lot of times I just stay there because I love, I love doing my Ganesha mantras. But yeah, it's amazing. I've been working with, sound healing. I've been working with Reiki and tuning forks. I love my tuning forks. But it's amazing how you really need like you were saying, the different pillars to all come together, where you've got body, mind, and spirit working. You can't just work on energy medicine. You can't just work on diet. You can't just work on your mind. You have to work on all three simultaneously. And then you're going to really have a change. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Is transformation.
It is transformation. It's transformation. Exactly. And speaking of transformation, we had been planning, a couple of colleagues and myself, to do a retreat. It was called the Reveal and Reset Retreat, where people would come in and they would have their jyotish, their chart read. We would have Ayurvedic consultation, introduction to Panchakarma, which is the detoxification protocols, and I would do their genetics. And so it was kind of this bridging, all-encompassing. Of course, it had to be postponed because of COVID-19. And so we're actually thinking in the fall, if it works out, we're going to try again. And it'll most likely be in New Mexico, because New Mexico is just this beautiful spiritual space. And yeah, so I just wanted to put it out there that, if people wanted to get in touch with me in terms of really biohacking and learning all this fun stuff about Ayurveda and jyotisha, it's going to be fun for sure.
Yeah. So. And that's actually how I discovered you, was from our mutual friend, Alexia, who is a jyotisha, and who has been, very, active on Instagram and talking about the retreat. And I thought, oh my gosh, that sounds so much fun. I would love to do something like that. And then this pandemic happened. And she directed me to you. And I'm so glad that she did, though. So if people are interested in the retreat, what is your website again?
So it's my name, Deborahlise.com. And I don't know if you're
in the comments too.
Okay. Yes. Perfect. And so that they can reach out to me there and see when it's happening. And if it's happening, we're going to keep the hope and the faith that we can provide this service to people, because this is really our bhakti, right? Our devotion of what we want to do. Yeah.
Right. And if for some reason it doesn't happen in the fall, then probably in the spring next year.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we're going to just keep putting it out there. It'll happen someday.
Be like at least a once a year thing,
Yeah.
Now, what city were you thinking about? Was it going to be Taos or Albuquerque or?
Well, we were looking at Santa Fe. But we're playing around in different areas, but we're bouncing ideas around, and now we have more time. So.
Well, count me in for that. I definitely want to come. That's something that I really feel like you said, it's so important to learn the different pillars, to understand how they work together. You can't just stay stuck in your mind. As a jyotishi, it's very tempting to just, it's like I wake up in the morning and I think about, I wonder what happened when this conjunction was, again, I run to my computer, like when did this happen? And I really get stuck in this researching monkey mind. And I have to pull myself back down. Okay, do your mantras. I do sacred dancing. So, I dance for my prayer, get outside, get my feet in the earth, ground myself. Because studying astrology, you can definitely just be way too long up in the mind. So
yes. You guys are brainiacs.
Oh, it's awful. I'm telling you. You have to be careful. But my goodness, thank you so much for a wonderful talk. And I know this is going to help so many people. Now, if you're interested in getting a session with her, please contact her on her website. She's got a contact form, and she will help guide you through your own personal biohacking and figure out, what specifically you need to eat and not eat, and, things that you can do to improve your health. And if you feel like you've come down with COVID-19 and you're looking for some different alternative remedies, this is definitely your lady. So with that, I want to close and thank you so much again for this today. I know that so many people are going to love it, and hopefully, we can come back again and talk about the retreat later, and we can talk about like all of the people that are going to be there, what they're doing, what the schedule is going to be like, because this sounds fantastic. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was an honor.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.